Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the Muslim Career Guide. Jazakallah khair so much, Brother Hassam, for joining us today.
Walaikum assalam wa iyaakum. I really appreciate the invitation. Happy to be here to have this conversation.
Yeah, so do you mind giving a brief introduction of who you are, what you do, and everything like that?
Sure. So I do many different things, and a lot of it I think is uncharted territory. Typically, you might ask someone and they might give you a one word for their career, right? Like
Yeah.
engineer or doctor or artist or something like that. For me, I am an emerging historian. So that's one way to put it, in the sense that I'm still in the process of going through academia to get my necessarily qualifications in history. But I really do a lot of history work in general, a lot of public history work. So my main interest is in trying to take historical knowledge and repackage it in a way that's very accessible and very digestible for like the general public, for people who are not historians or not history students, because I feel like history is so empowering. There's so much we can learn from it in terms of lessons. There's so much we can gain from it in terms of inspiration, and I want to bring that to the general public. And within the same or related, I guess, line of work, I would say my day job is at Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research, which is based in Dallas, Texas. I myself am based in Toronto, Canada. And I work there as a public relations manager as well as a research fellow. So I have a background in journalism and public relations. And when I try to bring that all together and explain to people what I do for a living, it's like, look, I am essentially a storyteller, right?
Yeah.
I like to tell stories. And I think it's so important for Muslims to tell their own story, to among ourselves, right? But also among the general public and in society. So whether I'm doing journalism, whether I'm doing public relations work for Muslim organizations, whether I'm doing my history work, it's all really just different forms of telling the story of the Muslim community in the past and the present.
Oh yeah, we Muslims really do need to tell our stories because other people have started to tell our stories and obviously not doing it in the best way. And so the fact that now we need to have more Muslim, not only role models, but also just people who are like stepping up and sharing our stories is like really important. And I was actually just going through your Instagram too, and I was like reading through some of your like story highlights, and it was really interesting of just like learning about how Muslims were involved in a lot of historical events like the Holocaust. Which we don't really learn about that much. So it definitely was a really cool experience to go through your Instagram.
Right.
So before we jump into the questions, I like to do like an icebreaker with my guests. So just really silly questions, and it's just gonna be rapid fire.
Okay.
So yeah, what is your favorite book?
Oh, I thought it was going to be rapid fire. It's I'm not going to have an answer for this one. I'm telling you right off the bat,
Okay.
because I love history. I read
Yeah.
so much different kinds of things. I can't say a favorite book. Even if you gave me like different genres, it would take me a while. So you can't
Okay.
ask a historian that. All we do is read books, right?
Cute. Okay. Then what's your favorite movie?
Oh, it's my favorite movie. Slightly easier. I would say maybe I really like sci-fi movies. I really like historical movies. Obviously, one
Yeah.
of my favorites I would say is a Bollywood movie called Lagan. So I really like that since childhood. So let me go with that one. I'm sorry, I know it's supposed to be rapid fire, but you know,
No, it's okay. Usually it's hard to have rapid fire, but texting or calling?
texting. Yeah.
What's something that you don't understand?
Oh, there's a lot of things I don't understand. Math. I'm so good at math. How about that?
Yeah, you're the second person to say that from one of our guests. Favorite recent purchase?
Favorite recent purchase. It's probably a book. I purchased a lot of books recently.
Yeah.
It's great to see how many books are coming out now that are sort of professionally published by Muslim authors, and they're sort of very academically framed, and we're getting past some of the archaic kind of language and all that. So
Yeah.
it'd be a long list because I published, or sorry, I inshallah I will publish, but I purchased a lot of books recently.
Oh wow. And then the last one is favorite emoji.
Um, probably the yeah, I guess probably the laughing with the tears
Yeah.
emoji. I people don't understand this about me because they have a certain perception of history and historians and
Yeah.
uh, just people in academia in general, that they're no fun. But like if you talk to me generally, like if you're my friends all know this, of course, is like I am like 10% history and 90% just a class clown. I love to joke around,
Yeah.
right? I'm from a city. I was born in a city in Pakistan named Faisalabad, and it's famous for like being producing sarcastic people and just like being a place where like everyone just cracks jokes all day and just
Yeah.
roasts, and it's a fun place, right? So I carry that legacy very proudly.
No, that's really important to have a sense of humor. But thank you so much for the rapid fire questions. We'll jump straight into the interview. So my first question, how did you decide that you want to pursue a career in history?
Okay, I just heard the last bit of that. I'm not sure why.
Oh,
Could you
I
just
think the internet connection there messed up. But why did you want to pursue a career in history?
Okay, very good question. Very important question because I know many people um, from a young age, and including people's parents as well. We all have these thoughts about, okay, of course,
Mm.
I don't want to say that the Muslim community has no interest in history. There's a lot of informal conversations about history. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of interest that I see. It's just the question of when you want to make it a career that it becomes okay. Like maybe let's not go that far in that direction. But obviously, they
Definitely.
understand the value of history, I think, at a basic level. For me, it was very much about, again, storytelling. Growing up in Canada in sort of the post 9/11 environment, where we had there were two Islams. There's the Islam that we practiced at home and that we learned about in Sunday school, which it instills all of these beautiful values. It develops your character into something that
Mhm.
everyone would want to appreciate, right? And then there's the Islam you would hear about on TV when you turned on the news, right?
Yeah.
Or you would read about in newspapers or even in classroom. Like people would just casually throw around remarks like, they'll call you like a terrorist or whatever, right? So growing up in that environment, it was so confusing for me, and I think for many others. Like at that young age, it's like, okay, so which Islam is the real Islam, right? Is it that
Definitely.
one, or is it the one my parents tell me about? Is the one that people talk about on TV? So for me, it was very much about, okay, um, we need to step back. We need to sort of take a bird's eye view, basically,
Yeah.
right? First of all, how did things get to where they are, right? Is Islam really a backward religion? Is that why? I mean, if you do look at the Muslim majority parts of the world, I mean, many of them are impoverished. Many of them are, there's a lot of corruption in them. There's a lot of things that seem to be um, endemic in them, which are the opposite of what you would expect from modern society,
Mm.
right? So the question then arises, well, is Islam the problem? Right? Is it because they're all Muslim? I mean, that's one thing they all have in common, right? So those are some of the questions I was grappling with growing up. And I realized, okay, I can't jump to a judgment here because obviously I do love this religion. I do practice this religion. So I had that strong hesitation. So I'm like, okay, what I need to do, what is helpful is to take a step back, take a bird's eye view, because if Islam is the problem, that means every society that Islam produced historically as well must have been basically very backward or very challenged in these kinds of ways, right? But hey, if you go back for most of Islamic history, once I started realizing that, when you go back to most of Islamic history, hey, it was the same Islam that produced the world's leading civilization for centuries and centuries, right? So you have to step back, you have to kind of step away from being immersed within the culture, the society, the beliefs and values that you're in right now, and be like, okay, what is the fuller picture here? So that's sort of what I was doing for myself, really, not as a career trajectory or anything like that. I
Mm.
never really thought of myself being a historian, to be honest, until like my second or third year of university. Even when I went into
Oh,
university, I went for media studies, right? I wanted to go into journalism. Again, that's storytelling. I wanted to, I even applied for a master's in journalism after, right? And
oh,
got accepted and was thinking
lovely.
about going in that direction.
Yeah.
So I came very, very close to just pursuing a full on career in journalism. Um, of history had developed, and also knowing that, okay, there are many others who will do journalism, but there may not be as many people who will take this path, right? And this is an uncharted territory. It does need to be changed, right? So it's not just, I don't want to be, I don't even want to get a PhD, to be honest with you, right? What I want to do as a historian is to connect history with the public through things like virtual reality projects, through things like digital maps, through things like apps, all these new technologies that we have available, to use those to make people interested in history, even things like video games, right? So
Mhm.
powerful, such a meaningful way, engaging way to teach people from a young age about history, and to start, instilling that understanding of history within them. So that's a long-winded answer, but basically that's how I got into this space where I am right now. And of course, it's a work in progress. Like
Mhm.
that's why I hesitate to call myself like a historian. I know that comes with a certain baggage. It comes with certain expectations, right? And I'm not sure that's the trajectory I'm really on. I'm really trying to be a storyteller for the Muslim community.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're right with like talking about just how culture and media has such a huge part in like distorting Islam. It's like now going through classes at Sunnah Camp specifically for me, like I realized, wait, that culture aspect that was mixed into Islam is not Islam. And so what we thought was backwards was really not even a part of Islam in the first place. So it's like, why are we like, it just sometimes our perceptions like change because we're seeing a lot of culture come in. We see a lot of like just other media come into play. But when we learn about the real true Islam, we see that it's not really backwards and stuff like that. So it's important for us to learn. It's important for us to put it into like the kind of like instead of now having I guess I'm trying to say like lectures all the time, like you said, have it more implemented in media and have people learning it through media, which is extremely important for everyone because that's just where we are in as a society right now. That's really cool. And what are the levels of education you've already gone through? And are there any more levels of education you have to go through, like for the career path that you want to be on?
Yeah, so I'll speak for, I guess, in that sense, history specifically. You have to, I mean, it's an academia oriented kind of discipline, right? And you certainly don't need a undergraduate degree, right? So first of all, I guess let me point this out. In Don't be discouraged by the experience of learning history that you get from your standardized like high school experience and things like that, right? History is much more broader than what is taught. And I often talk to teachers, and I work with a lot of teachers to try to bring some of the more, to try to diversify their lesson plans, to try to diversify the curriculum itself. And teachers themselves who have been teaching history for years and years are shocked. Like they have been teaching Canada's role in World War II for like 20 years, 30 years, and they are shocked to find this new information about how maybe like Black Canadians contributed to the war effort, or how Muslims contributed to the war effort, etc. Right, as one example. And so don't be discouraged by that. And in fact, take the initiative to challenge that within those classroom spaces. I mean, this information isn't hard to find, and part of my work is to make sure that this information isn't hard to find, which is why I blog, right? I blog about these different kinds of topics, hopefully making them easier for people to find online, but it's up to you to do the search. It's like, okay, I'm learning something in class. Is it boring? I would agree. It probably is boring. I was bored in a lot of my history classes, right, in high school, but don't let that discourage you from the subject itself. The subject
Mhm.
itself is very rich, very inspiring, so much to learn, very enlightening. So in terms of pursuing a career in it, then if you do have that inclination, um, in your undergraduate, in your college or university, to be honest, it doesn't really matter if you take a history degree or not, right? If you're within the humanities or if you're within the social sciences, like if you're within those two broad like umbrella categories under which there are many different disciplines, first of all, you're going to be learning a lot of history, right? In general, in anything. So if you take like a degree in, for example, like social sciences generally, or in anthropology or in economics or any of these kind of things, you're going to be learning a lot of history anyways, right? It's embedded into all of those subjects. And then secondly, if you want to pursue it further, it will be enough for you. If you want to, let's say, do a master's after that in history, having a undergraduate degree in economics, generally speaking, it'll be more than enough, right?
Mhm.
The other thing I would suggest to people at the undergrad level is to, um, keep your options open, right? Definitely keep your options open. I mean, it goes without saying that history isn't the most financially rewarding career, right? Not immediately. It's definitely not immediately very rewarding, and in the long run, it's uncertain, right? How things will go and in which direction they will go. So I don't just want to put out there like a general kind of encouragement to everyone go and study history. Like, keep in mind what your particular situation is, what your particular plans for the future are, how you want to be able to make a living and set up your life right in your 20s at a young age, all of those kinds of things. um, so that's another reason why it may be beneficial to explore options, like maybe you can do a double major, history and something else. People often do those kinds of things, a major minor program. Or they'll do like, I have a general interest in history, which is how I started out, by the way. Like I said, I started out in media studies. I wanted to go into journalism, right? So I was like, okay, even though I had a huge interest in history at that point, but I was thinking also about balancing, okay, what are my needs, right? How am I going to sort of set up my life as I move forward? And it was only in like third year that I switched to a double major. Then again, I majored in media studies and history in undergrad. So keep that in mind as well. Maybe you can do a degree in economics. It'll keep some other options open for you. And then if you want to continue on in history, you make that decision, you're prepared for that as well. So it's a very flexible world, right? It's a very dynamic world. Things change quickly, opportunities come and go very quickly. So keep your options open. And then the level I'm currently at, so I completed that. Then I went into my master's program. I'm doing my master's in history at the University of Toronto. Um, One thing I would suggest, because I know this is a primarily Muslim audience, is make sure you have um, a ongoing solid religious grounding when you are pursuing history or many of these disciplines in like the social sciences, in the humanities, because history is its interpretation, right? It's interpretation, and in many ways, um, there are interpretations that really will challenge what you believe as a Muslim. And these are huge issues that happen in history departments in all places, right? Our understanding of history, especially when it comes to certain aspects of history that we as Muslims consider sacred history, like the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or even the period, the early period of the companions of the Sahaba. For us, that's sacred history. So we have a personal attachment and approach to that period of history, but you will have to engage in spaces where for people that's just, not only is it not personal to them in any way, right, but it's not sacred to them in any way, but at the same
Mhm.
time they are working in a very Islamophobic framework, right? So not only are they neutral about it, but they're working within a framework that, it's really like the kind of skepticism you will get about like the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is way beyond what necessarily needs to happen,
Mhm.
even within the sort of parameters of the history discipline. So that's not, again, that shouldn't be a discouragement. And to be honest, now there are a lot of scholars that challenge that. They are like, no, we're going to be unapologetically Muslim, including about our history. And at the same time, we are going to make space for ourselves and function within these academic spaces. So history programs at the graduate level, at the master's level, generally are very short. They're about 10 months. Sometimes they're about like a year long. Again, keep your flexibility. I myself am doing it. I'm doing it part-time. It's a 10-month program and I'm already in like my third year,
Mhm.
right? But that's not to say that those years have been wasteful necessarily, right?
Mhm.
It's just to say that I have been doing a lot of other different kinds of things that are part of my education as a historian, just not within a classroom, just not within the academy itself, right? And then the PhD level, I won't really go into because, first of all, I haven't been there, so I haven't had that experience myself. Secondly, I think anyone who's listening to this who actually makes it that far will find people to give them advice more specific to their situation. So I think that shouldn't be a challenge, inshallah. But definitely I think the most important is at the high school level to keep your mind open about history, even if the way it's taught to you is discouraging. At the undergraduate level, keep your options open. Certainly, be flexible. Take many different courses. I tried to take courses in marketing and social sciences and many different disciplines. Broaden your horizons, right? And even if you do end up in history, having that broadened horizon is going to be very helpful. Like right now, I do a lot of public history work on social media, and those marketing courses that I took are really helpful for me right now in doing that history work, right? Putting those two interdisciplinary efforts together. And then the master's level, again, be very careful, be very conscious of the kind of framework within which those spaces are set up, and make sure you develop your own foundations to be able to work within that framework and challenge it as well.
And I mean, that's good advice for anyone that wants to like pursue a career into anything. Like keep your horizons like broadened, and you should feel good about
I
it.
can't
Yeah, and also like speaking of your master's, like do you think a master's and PhD should be required, or anyone that wants to pursue a career in history should get a PhD or master's?
Okay, so I just heard the last bit there.
Yeah, so should everyone get their master's and PhD if they want to pursue a career in history?
Oh, not necessarily, right? I mean, so history is the field is changing. Many fields are changing right now, right?
Mhm.
The university kind of model that stood for decades and decades, that is changing. The teaching model, the learning model. You'll hear things about like companies like Google don't even require a degree anymore, right?
Yeah.
They'll just bring you in and they'll be like, okay, show us what you can do. It's basically show us what you can do. If you can actually do it, that's your career, right? That's the career you can build for yourself. And degrees necessarily, in some professions there's a lot of standardization. So I wouldn't say to like a surgeon that you don't need to do all your education in
Yeah.
surgery. You can just kind of explore and try different things. I wouldn't suggest that to like a surgeon or like an engineer who has to build a bridge or a building or something like that,
Mhm.
right? Like standardization is important. Going through those kind of things is important. And while history is certainly important as well in setting the narrative in society, in guiding society, in helping us understand our role in society and where we are, it's not urgently like a risk to human life directly
Yeah.
necessarily, right? So in that sense, it's like, okay, we have some relative leeway to explore the possibilities here, and keeping in mind the fact that, of course, while you are charting uncharted territory, while you're exploring new things, while you're not getting your master's and PhD and still trying to do history work, there are many people who are doing their masters and PhD. It's not like, if you don't do it, like who's going to do it? Most people, I think, will continue to go in that direction and
Mhm.
continue to pursue those careers of, most people become like history professors. Some of them go into government. Some of them go into activism and media. People even who complete their PhDs in history end up in many different places. But what I would suggest, what I would, my personal kind of encouragement would be to explore, right? Explore the possibilities. What can you do through especially new technologies and everything that they enable us to do, right? There's so much work to be done in that space. So I would encourage you not necessarily to go directly for the pipeline, as they call it, of the undergrad to the master's to the PhD to the postdoc, and just continuing down that line. And this is being reflected in academia itself as well. Like what you'll see popping up recently in the last few years is more and more public history programs, right? So now you can get a master's in public history where you'll learn things like how do you manage a museum, right? How do you curate an exhibit? How do you do a guided tour of a historic site? Like there's this understanding that history needs to be more and more open. You even see people who do have PhDs on Twitter. Like all the historians are on Twitter now, and they're weighing in on real life kind of situations, right? They're weighing in on current politics. So it's becoming a little bit messy, but I think it is important to go through that experience collectively as people in the field and see how we can change it, because history has been um, deeply problematic, right? The way history has been learned and taught, and what public awareness has been generated about history has been used to justify a lot of horrible things. And we can see it right now if you read the news, the kind of things that are justified by these sort of highly problematic understandings or misunderstandings of history, right? So um, basically, in a nutshell, that's it. You don't need a master's or PhD to be a historian, to pursue a career in this field. Um, and if you do want to go in that direction, that's fine as well. If you do have that inclination, there's a lot of great work that can be done within academia as well. But it's just because I'm in the minority of people who are trying to work on this outside of academia that I'd suggest other people should also try to think about that as well.
Yeah, and moving on to public history work, as a public history worker, what are some of the projects that you work on?
Yeah, a lot of different things, which is part of the fun of it, right? It's not very monotonous. You always have to be thinking about what you can do differently. So I'll start off with like the most basic one is I started my blog during undergrad, right? And that's like a basic kind of essential thing. And you just learn a lot of skills about how to set up a website. It's really been a one-person project, but it gives you a lot of transferable skills that then you can also use in other places, right? How do you set up a website? How do you write a blog? How do you take like something that you've read in 5 different books, and now you're trying to put it all together in an article that you want somebody to be able to finish in 7 minutes and
Mhm.
still get your main points across? So it really helps you understand what it is that you're reading, because you know you can't write like a 20-page essay on it. It has to be a short blog, and it has to be for a non-specialist audience. So there's that. Then there's social media. I do a lot of Twitter, Instagram kind of work, just making people aware of history through that. I've done guided tours of historic sites. I've done both here in Canada. I've done one in Istanbul as well through social media. I've done a lot of podcasting work. I've done a lot of curating exhibits, helping with different kinds of projects. I'm helping an organization work on a children's video game right now based on Islamic history. So
Oh,
it's just so many different kinds of fun things that you get to be involved in.
yeah, no, that sounds really cool. And sometimes, like, I feel like research and concept can be can be very time consuming. Do you ever get like frustrated or sometimes even bored when you're stuck in a rut or you're just spent so much time on it?
Yeah, it is a very taxing. You know, you have to give your dues, and you have to really invest a lot of time and energy into it. I think it's researching itself is an art, right? You have to learn over time. So when I was, a few years ago, I would like spend a lot of time and gain not as much as I do now. It slowly shifts. So now I spend less time on research, but I gain more from it, because you just learn how to do the research. You just learn what to keep an eye out for. You just learn how to use your research as well, right? And that's the point. Like once you are able to use it for a particular purpose, then all of the effort seems worthwhile. So you have to, for yourself, develop that entire process of doing the research, but also putting it into some kind of end product, and then seeing how people benefit from it, taking people's feedback, and taking people's energy, taking people's interest in that subject, and then going back to the research, and then it becomes a cycle, right? So those kind of things I feel like are just part of the process that it takes time to learn. But research can be dull. It can be a dull process a lot of times,
Mhm.
but you have to do it. That's just comes with the territory, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like speaking of research, you mentioned that you do research with Yaqeen along with also a PR worker. So what is the process that you will take when researching for a topic or concept?
So I joke around with people a lot, like I said at the beginning, right? Whenever someone asks me like, "Hey, like this is amazing. Where did you learn about it?" I'm like, Wikipedia, right? And it's only partly a joke. I mean, my go-to place is the internet, right? And I know there's huge kind of discouragement at like the high school level and university
Mhm.
level of like, "Hey, don't just believe whatever you see on Google and YouTube." And that's correct, right? I'm not arguing against that. That being said, you have to develop your own media literacy skills, and the only way to do that is by actually going in there. So what the real thing to understand is, don't believe everything that you see when you Google something,
Yeah.
but go through a lot of different sources. Put the time into, okay, I'm going to go through a lot of different sources that show up in the Google results, etc. So I think that part is really important. That's to be honest, I say it openly. That's where I always start. Wikipedia, go through the sources in Wikipedia, go through Google News articles, and then that'll give you like a very basic kind of outline of, at least even if you don't have the right perspective on a certain historical topic, etc., you have an outline of who talks about it and where do they talk about it, and then you can go into your systems or wherever else you can do your research. You can go in there and start to get those resources and then engage with it deeper, but don't hesitate to Google. Why? Because if you Google, you'll end up in places like my blog, right? You'll end up in places like a lot of different kinds of projects. So I'm in Canada, right? And we have a very far off, I mean, Canada is a far off corner of the world to begin with, but we
Yeah.
have a very far off territory within Canada called Yukon territory, like just bordering Alaska in the north. And I was doing a project on Black history in Canada, and I just Googled it, like, just Googled Black history in the Yukon. And it's something that will never ever show up if you don't do that specific search. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Search for specific things. Just add words to the Google search. It doesn't have to be like, perfect. And they had, the government of the Yukon, the most amazing website about Black history in the Yukon, a place where you wouldn't even imagine for there to be any Black history, right? But it was like a full digital curated exhibit, right? And it was a great learning experience. So a lot of stuff is on the internet, and access that, and then once you get there, you'll know where to go because of what you read there.
Yeah, and speaking of a trustworthy resource, like how do you make sure that something that you're researching or a website that you've come across is trustworthy and you can use that for your own research?
So this is a deep question, right? You really have to become familiar with the field, like the particular field of work. And I'm not just, I mean, Islamic history is a huge kind of field,
Yeah.
right? Within that, about like one particular event, like if I want to study the Abbasid revolution, right? There are people who are authorities, there are people who spread misinformation, there are people who have religious viewpoints that don't align with the history. There are people who have the history viewpoint that doesn't take into consideration the religious aspect. So there's so many different things about that one event. So it really, which is why I think it's important to start just with a very general search. Don't go straight into the sources, because if you go straight into the sources, chances are you're going to end up as a starting point on one specific kind of viewpoint. And then
Mhm.
there's so many sources, you'll just get lost within that particular space. You're not seeing the full picture. You're just seeing like one particular corner of it. If you start in a general space like the Google search, Wikipedia, online encyclopedias, blogs, etc., you have a better chance of getting many different viewpoints. But really, the process is complicated. I really don't want to go into it here about how you cross-reference and you check the authors and you check the publishers and you do the background checks on all of those, and whether you use like university press published stuff or just the general press published. Like it's a for anyone who wants to go seriously into history research, like you will learn that stuff in undergrad, and obviously beyond that as well. But I won't go into it here. It just is a process that's important. So I'm glad you brought it up.
No, yeah, that's a great like brief overview of it. But my last question is if you could give any piece of advice to someone who wants to pursue a career in history, whether that's becoming a historian or something like that in that area, what would you give that? Like, what would that piece of advice be?
Okay. My advice to a person like that would be to certainly stay open minded, both in terms of what you, because that end product really is the motivation, right? If you want a career in history, if you're just interested in generally about learning, then I can be like, sure, you can just learn, you can buy books, you can spend all day at the library, you can do whatever you'd like. But if you're interested in a career in history, then you have to be very, very open-minded, flexible, creative, thinking all the time. And I literally mean like all the time about, okay, how could this message, how could this history piece of information be disseminated to the public in the most effective way? What's my end goal? What am I inspiring people to do, right? What am I communicating with people? How will they understand this? Because they don't have the same background that I do. So it's a lot of mental work. Brace yourself for that. Be patient, right? just keep going. But certainly all those things are part of it. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is to keep an open mind. Keep an open mind, because history is sadly often used to close minds. The way it's taught, it's like, here's what you need to know. There's a test next week. There's an exam at the end of this course. Okay, you're done. We taught you what you need to know. Don't worry about it. Right? That kind of history education is really pointless, if you ask me. Right? We have to be creative. We have to start thinking of history in unique and creative ways to move forward. It will take time. It's uncharted territory, but you got to start, right? Otherwise, it'll just take even more time. So there it is.
Yeah, Jazakallah so much, Brother Hassam, for joining us today and teaching us so much. Where can everyone find you?
Well, Yaqeen, I really appreciate the invitation. They can find me on my blog. It's www.ihistory.co, not .com, ihistory.co. And then on social media, on Twitter, if you just search Hassam M, my last name is Munir, Hassam Munir. If you search up Hassam M, you'll probably find me. On Instagram, hassam.history. Inshallah, you can find me that way and connect with me.
Yeah, inshallah, we'll leave all the links down below of Brother Hassan's just content along with the Nikkans. Jazakallah again so much for joining me, and inshallah we will see you all next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.